All right, so let's discuss UFC 320, and we're not going to bury the lead at all. Alex Periera with an unbelievable performance, one of the better performances I think I've seen in a championship fight in the UFC, because he did exactly what he needed to do. He made exactly the statement that he needed to make. I am the better striker. He proved that without the stamina issues, without any of the grappling, without having to take the first round to download and process his opponent like he did in the first fight. If he just comes right after Ankalaev with full energy, with a full gas tank, he is better than Ankalaev. And that's something that I don't think anybody expected, because the narrative after the first fight was that Ankalaev was simply the better fighter. Clearly not so. Ankalaev didn't know what to do when he got on his back. He didn't know how to respond to the ground and pound. And, when I saw him go down, I just said, well, he's going to wrestle now. That might not even be a benefit for Pereira. But then Pereira lays that body shot in, starts raining down the 12-6 elbows. And Ankalaev was like a fish out of water. It really seemed like he didn't expect to be in that situation. He didn't expect to be in that situation that early into the fight. And it didn't really seem like he trained for any kind of grappling situation where he was damaged and in top control, or I don't know if you could call ground and pound top control, really. I think it was more of side control with elbows, 12-6 elbows raining down into his temple as he desperately tried to keep his hands over his face and not take too much damage. And, Pereira was just landing those elbows right into Ankalaev's glove, but there was no resistance. Ankalaev looked helpless and damaged and completely out of his element. And I think a lot of people expected Ankalaev to come in and just dominate to the tune of a 5-round unanimous decision. And Alex Periera showed that I don't know if that was ever in the realm of possibility with a game plan like that from Poatan. It was really genius stuff. Ankalaev didn't get a takedown in the first fight. I think everybody knew that a big part of Ankalaev's game plan in this game was initiating wrestling and winning grappling exchanges. So it was genius of Pereira to actually focus solely on his striking and just take that chance. It was a gamble, really. It was a gamble that paid off so well, you're never going to know it was a gamble. Pereira can just go out there and say, I knew I was going to knock him out round 1 and I did it. And everyone will respect that because it seems like that's what happened. I think that this was a big gamble from Pereira, and that if Pereira didn't knock out Ankalaev in the first round with that energy that provides that extremely superior striking, he would have been in a lot of trouble, Poatan. I think you could have actually, if Ankalaev could have defended that ground and pound, kept that sequence going, even initiated some grappling, he could have tired Poatan out and cruised his way to a 4-1 decision win and retained his belt. Instead, he gets ground and pounded into a knockout, and we've either got a third fight or, I don't know, maybe Pereira will move on and do something else, because he's got all this star status. And the UFC want to make really, really big fights, and it just makes Pereira look like he was kind of always the star in the division. And I don't know if that wasn't always true, man. He's fought everybody, right? He's got Rountree. He's got Jiri twice. He's fought Ankalaev twice and won one time. Adesanya, obviously. The story of this light heavyweight division goes through Alex Periera. In so many ways, Alex Periera is the light heavyweight superstar of this era, of this generation. And this fight proved that with about as much aplomb as you possibly could ever have hoped for. One of the better, more decisive, more intelligent, actually, performances in the history of a UFC title fight. Dominant stuff from Alex Periera when next to nobody expected that outside of his biggest fans. So props to Alex Periera. I'm very excited to see what's coming next. And to be frank, I never should have underestimated you. Now we'll attack the undercard and the prelims, because there were some good fights on this card. I thought Patchy versus Jakub Wikłacz was going to be a close fight, and it definitely ended up being a close fight. I think a lot of people thought Patchy won that fight. It was definitely a controversial split decision win for Wikłacz. Mix was on top for most of the fight, and it's hard. And we're very used, as UFC fans, we're very used to the fighter that has more top control, that top controls for 2 of the 3 rounds getting the decision. And in this case, the decision was given to the guy who was on bottom for most of the fight, and that's always going to be controversial. But when I looked back on it, Wikłacz was initiating a lot more action from the bottom. I think most of what Patchy was doing was just trying to stop Wikłacz from moving, while Wikłacz was throwing all these punches from the bottom, all these strikes. and constantly going for submissions. And that was big. He was in love with this guillotine the entire fight, just going back to this guillotine over and over and over again. And in the end, I didn't think about it until the cards were read, but that was very intelligent. It clearly scored him points on the judges' scorecards and got him the win. And it shows that judges will reward you if you're the fighter on the bottom, if you do a lot of work from the bottom in the fight and, try to get out of those positions and try to get a win constantly. Wikłacz was constantly trying to do good things, and Mix was just trying to control. He wasn't trying to finish. He counted on those rounds on top, getting him the decision win, and the judges didn't award him that because there wasn't enough action from Patchy Mix. And ultimately, it's going to be another disappointing result for Patchy Mix, and we'll see what his future is in the UFC. Because I think to a certain extent he had a really bad performance in his first fight, and now a really conservative and measured performance in his second fight, just trying to win points, and he didn't even win the fight. So it's been a really disappointing stint in the UFC so far for Patchy Mix, and we'll see if he gets another fight in the promotion, unfortunately, after that highly anticipated debut. Next up is Santos versus Yoo, and I was right that Yoo should be on upset alert. I just didn't think that he was going to get knocked out. There's a long string of undefeated Asian fighters coming over to the UFC and losing in their debut fight. Unfortunately, that's been a trend. And Santos made sure that trend continued. Yoo tried to move forward with his striking and implement his striking in round one. And, it's not that he didn't look good. It's not that he isn't a crisp and competent striker. It's just that there's a different level to the UFC, and Santos definitely represents that kind of fighter. And, at this level, your striking really might not be better than the guy across from you. These are the very best in the world. And it can happen to any fighter. It is not necessarily a thing about Asia. I don't think. It can happen to any fighter from any regional scene. You come over to the big leagues, to the biggest promotion in the world, and all of a sudden, that guy across from you, who you thought you were going to be able to outstrike, nah, he's got the same level of striking as you do. And it's a tough result for Joo-sang, who suffers his first career loss, but hopefully he gets more chances in the UFC and we get more chances to see what he has to offer. Magomedov versus Pyfer. I said before, Magomedov is a very good wrestler, but Pyfer is a better fighter, and ultimately that was proven true. Magomedov controlled round one, actually doing a really, really good job on the feet. But then Pyfer turned it around in the second round, started better on the feet, and controlled the wrestling more impressively. Magomedov had moments in round one where he controlled with the striking and controlled with the grappling, and Pyfer in round two, when he controlled with the striking, when he controlled with the grappling, when he took back control of the fight, it all looked better. It all looked more competent, and it all looked a lot more dangerous, and it was dangerous. Pyfer eventually got the submission finish halfway through the round to finish Magomedov. And, I said it was going to be a great day for Eastern Europe, and there were some Eastern European fighters that fought on this card, but I think both Pyfer and Poatan proved that, there's a lot of really great Russian fighters, but they're not superhuman. If you're a great fighter, you can absolutely beat these guys at their own game. You can out-wrestle them, you can out-grapple them, and you can out-strike them, and Joe Pyfer proved that against Magomedov. But, a lot of people were saying in and around and before the fight that Magomedov is a bit of an overrated fighter, at least compared to other Russian grapplers, and unfortunately for Magomedov, I think those voices are going to get a little louder after that loss to Pyfer. So we'll see how Magomedov advances in the UFC, and if Pyfer gets a nice step up after this. He definitely deserves it. He's fought a lot of high-level guys before. Youssef Zalal was so impressive against Josh Emmett. I saw a lot of people saying that Josh Emmett had a chance in this fight, that he's 40, he doesn't have the height advantage, but he's got all that ring IQ. He's got all that experience. He's crafty. He knows the game well. Zalal dominated. Zalal was going to get a finish. He was going to get a submission. He was so determined to find that armbar. It's really, really risky. You put yourselves in a lot of risky positions going for submissions that aggressively. Zalal didn't care. That youth, that aggression, that will, that want to prove yourself is a very, very powerful thing. And Youssef Zalal always had that on Emmett, in addition to probably having a bit of a skill gap, especially at this point now that Emmett is let's be honest, it's hard not to be on your way out when you're 40. It just is what it is. That's how it works in sports. That's that age where, that those previous skills and even a bit of that previous grit and tenacity just starts to go away, and there's nothing you can do about it. And Youssef Zalal has a lot to prove to a lot of people in the UFC, clearly, with his talent level. So good for Youssef Zalal. Now let's get to the three big fights on this card. And Khalil Rountree Jr. versus Jiri Procházka was an unbelievable fight. You know, I remember thinking after Rountree beat Jamal Hill that Rountree could beat Procházka, that Rountree could beat anybody in the light heavyweight division. And as it came to this fight and I thought about the size difference, you know, it's not boxing, but it was like a boxing match in that the smaller fighter with the faster punches just seemed incapable of knocking down the larger man. It seemed like Rountree could hit Jiri with anything and Jiri would just take it. Right? He was not going to get knocked out. He wasn't even going to get stopped or particularly stunned by Rountree. When Rountree hit him with a really, really big overhand, he just kind of got mad and cursed. That was the worst we got out of him in round one. And round one was bad for Jiri. It looked like Rountree was going to dominate the fight. Jiri looked weird. His legs looked slow. He was slipping and tripping around. It really took Jiri, I think, some time to get his feet underneath him in this fight. But in round three, man, he just locked in. I think Rountree, he started the round more tired, obviously. He'd spent the last 10 minutes trying to break down this huge dude. And now the speed just wasn't quite the same. And once Jiri discovered, oh, I can trade in the pocket with this guy, the fight was pretty much over for Rountree. Jiri just had that power, even deep into round three after taking damage. His power just played in a way that Rountree's didn't, where every shot seemed to be affecting Rountree, whereas for 2 rounds, Rountree had been hitting Jiri, and it's not like the punches had been bouncing off him, but they weren't having an effect. And Rountree, immediately his eye was shut, immediately he was struggling, immediately you could tell that it wasn't about that he didn't want to move out and cycle out and use the ring and get out of trouble. He just couldn't. He was too tired. Jiri's beating the crap out of him right in front of each other, swinging away. And in a phone booth like that, once Rountree is tired, it was just a matter of time. And he went in there and got a really, really destructive finish in round three that had looked like a complete impossibility in round one. You know, as you were seeing it happen, it felt a lot less like a comeback and a lot more like a game plan from Jiri Procházka. And it was just, honestly, a really, really fun and memorable fight that went back and forth in about as pure of a way as a fight can go back and forth. It went back and forth. It was Rountree's fight in round 1 and 2, and in round 3 it was all Jiri Procházka. It was all Jiri Procházka. And Jiri Procházka desperately wants that third Pereira fight. I still think that Pereira is a nightmare of a matchup for Procházka. That fast technical striking that Rountree was able to piece up Jiri with in the first 2 rounds of this fight before Jiri figured it out, Pereira has that same technical striking. He's bigger. And he actually does have that power. That big shot that frustrated Jiri in round 1, if Pereira throws that shot, Jiri's flat on the canvas. He's not frustrated. He's not cursing. He's not coming back in round 3 and finishing. He's flat on the canvas and the fight's over. And we've seen that happen twice already. We've seen that Pereira has the power to knock out Jiri. And after seeing how slow Jiri started and how long it took him to have to download information, how wonky he looked even deep into the second round. And I don't mean wonky in a good way. I don't mean wonky like DDP wonky, like René de Ritter wonky. I mean like it really kind of looked like Jiri Procházka didn't know what he was doing. I don't even know. I was wondering, did he is there some secondary issue outside of the cage? Honestly, he looked that bad in the first at spots in the first 2 rounds that I genuinely wondered if something was wrong with Jiri Procházka. And he came through in round 3 and proved that there was never really anything wrong. He just needed to figure out what he was going to do against such a fast, skilled, technical opponent. And thankfully for Procházka, Rountree, it just seems like he's a little too small for this weight. To be real with you, I think Rountree could be a champion at middleweight. He's too small for a light heavyweight, at least to go against these really big light heavyweights like Jiri and Alex, clearly. And it was really 2 great knockouts, 2 great performances from Jiri and Pereira, like we've seen so many times before, proving that they're really the 2 main draws and the 2 main stars of this light heavyweight division in this era. But I'm just not in love with the stylistic matchup between the 2, and I think that Pereira would win a 3rd fight. I'm actually much more curious to see Pereira versus Ankalaev 3, even if that probably wouldn't be the fight that Pereira versus Jiri 3 would be, and that would just obviously be a striking exchange, and it would probably end in an exciting knockout. It's just, let's be honest, I think the person getting knocked out would be Jiri. On to a Sandhagen versus Merab. And this fight went about how I expected. Sandhagen got out to a better start than I expected. His striking looked very good, but Merab figured it out pretty quickly. You just got to turn him around to get him against the cage and hit him with knees. That's all this fight was. That's all this fight turned into. The last 4 rounds of this 5-round fight was mainly Merab pinning Cory Sandhagen up against the cage and delivering knees to the back of his thigh. It was not a fantastically fun fight after the first round and a little bit into the second, where there were a lot of striking exchanges and Merab hadn't quite figured out the grappling yet. But once Merab figured out the grappling, the fight was over. Sandhagen was always going to be tired in those late rounds once he came out and actually had chances to strike, because he's just been getting grappled this entire time, even if it's on the feet, especially if it's on the feet. Merab was just kind of hanging off his back up against the cage. It wasn't a super entertaining fight, but it was impressive by Merab still nonetheless. You still see Merab's striking ability, you still see his grappling ability, of course, and you still see his engine. They're all there. He's pretty much cleared out this division. I don't know who he fights next. It'll be really interesting to see who he fights next. But to me, bantamweight very, very clearly has a new GOAT, as I said. And it's nice that you have a dominant champion in the bantamweight division who's determined to defend his belts, clearly loves being the UFC champion, clearly loves defending his title. And, it's nothing against Cory Sandhagen, but, I think a lot of people are craving a true superstar. I think a lot of people see Sean O'Malley as being overrated at this point in time. They see those wins as being overrated. And, of course, you have Umar, which is a highly impressive win and really I think is when a lot of people started calling Merab the bantamweight GOAT. But, Cory Sandhagen, it was never the biggest challenge of a title defense, and I would like to see Merab have a serious challenge put in front of him in his next fight, if that's at all possible. And we'll come back around and finish the video talking about Pereira versus Ankalaev once again, and really what I think of a prospective third fight, because I think that the third fight has all the potential in the world to be the best of the 3. Because after these 2 fights, we still have not seen Ankalaev try to grapple with Pereira. So that in a third fight, there's going to be another level of willingness to grapple from Ankalaev and a whole other level of comfort with his striking from Pereira. I think that even deep into those rounds, round 4, round 5, if Ankalaev can implement his wrestling, if he can implement his striking better, if the fight goes more how the first one did than the second one did, which honestly I think is more likely. I think it's a lot more likely that the third fight plays out a little more like the first fight than the second fight. Not that I don't think Pereira isn't capable of, bum rushing Ankalaev again and knocking him out in the first round. I just think it's always unlikely that it's going to work as well as it just did. That was really special stuff from Pereira last night, and you can't really count on that happening again in the third fight. I think it's a lot more likely that the third fight is these 2 guys in the ring for all 5 rounds, and if that happens, in round 3, in round 4, in round 5, deep into the fight, you're going to see a Pereira who's much more comfortable taking big chances and trying to land big shots and big combos and really trade on the feet with Ankalaev, if Ankalaev even lets him. So I think that you're going to see a more aggressive Ankalaev and a more comfortable Pereira in terms of trading on the feet and trying to land the KO. And as a result, you're just going to see a more entertaining fight than what you saw in the first fight, and a much closer fight than what you saw in the second. So I'm already anticipating this third fight between Pereira and Ankalaev. I think a lot of fans are going to be on the side of both fighters. A lot of people are going to be saying that Ankalaev, a more true showing of the full spectrum of MMA skills, and that overall Ankalaev is still the better fighter, still the superior fighter. It's just that Pereira is the superior striker, and we know that now. Nobody can claim that Ankalaev is definitely the better striker after that. So I think the third fight's going to be hard to call. I think it's going to generate a lot of talk. I think a lot of people are going to be talking about it for a long time. And I think it's going to provide us with another amazing chapter in the history of the light heavyweight division and the light heavyweight title, which has always been really one of the marquee, if not honestly the marquee division in the UFC, just by virtue of its stars and the fights that division has generated, much more so than heavyweight throughout history, in my opinion, much more so than middleweight throughout the history of the UFC, in my opinion. The light heavyweight division just seems to be the gift that keeps on giving. And in the form of Pereira versus Ankalaev 3, I think we're going to get another classic if that fight ever comes to fruition. So that was an amazing statement made by Alex Periera. It was a great night for Merab, to the surprise of few, and one of the more interesting title fights and one of the more interesting results, I think, in terms of just how dominant Rountree was in those first 2 rounds, just to be met from that response by Jiri in round 3. And that genius game plan from Pereira, of course, in the main event. That was an awesome event. That was a great night for the UFC. It was an even better night for Alex Periera. And I think it, most importantly, reestablished Pereira as a superstar, as a draw, as a great fighter. And honestly, that's one of those moments that helps build your legend. Not that Pereira wasn't a legend already for all those KOs that he's accumulated, but that was one of the more intelligent, measured, and high-quality victories of what has been an unbelievably high-quality career for Alex Periera. Like and subscribe. Make sure you guys hit that like and that subscribe for more UFC content, and I will see you on the next one. Peace out. That was a very, very fun night of fights.